This conference will now be recorded.
So yesterday session, we were discussing about Docker Compose. What is Docker Compose and how we can use this Docker Compose. It's a tool for defining and running single container or multi-container application. Using Docker Compose, can I run, I mean to say, can I deploy multiple containers together if required? We can do that. It's a tool for defining multi-container applications. So it's a YAML file. It's an YAML file, YML file. What is YAML? YAML or YAML, as we discussed yesterday. So what is YAML? It's basically one file format, right? So the full form of this one, basically YAML stands for Ain't Markup Language. Ain't Markup Language. People call it as a yet another markup language. Or people call it as a yet another markup language also, right? So it's more, it is a data serialization language. It's a data serialization, which is human friendly, which is human friendly, which means by looking at this, by looking at that YML files, can we easily understand? Do you have any difficulty to understand what information you are defining in that YML? Like it contains some data, right? It is in a more human friendly, right? So YMLs are widely used in a lot of places, as I already told, right? Many programmatic languages, many tools we are using. So YML is completely based on the indentation, right? It is completely based on the indentation. We can define the strings, we can define the objects, we can define the arrays in YML format, right? So this Docker Compose is also in the YML format. Yesterday, we created a compose file that is in the form of YML. So if you see, what are the root attributes we have defined in this compose file? The root attributes, in the sense which are beginning in the file, beginning from the line. What are these root attributes we have? We have a version, we have a services, we have volumes, we have networks. Now, under this networks, we define the network information. There is a two spaces here, network name and from which driver it has to be created. Under volume section, volume name, from which driver it has to be created. Even though I don't mention this one like this, what is the default driver for volume it will use? What is the default for network? What is the driver it will use for network? Bridge. Now, where did we define our containers information? Basically kind of a services. How many services to be created? Where did we define that information? that is defined under services. So how many services we have defined now? How many services we have defined now? 2 services as of now based on our requirement. This is one service from which image I am trying to create this service, basically this container. From this image, this is the port mapping, these are the environment variables for that, this is the network in which I want to have service name Mongo from this one. Now this service, I mean to say this container has to communicate with this container, this service. So if you see, I am passing host name as Mongo, but if I create service name here, suppose if I give it as a ABC, does this will able to resolve this host if I give service name here as ABC? No. If this is ABC, can I give this one also ABC so that will it work? It will work, but give some meaningful name. So that's why I'm giving as Mongo. Now this Mongo service, Mongo container will be created using these details. These details. So this is my compose file. What command we used yesterday to deploy these services using Docker Compose we deployed. What command we used yesterday to deploy this? If you remember, yesterday we executed this one, Docker Compose up -d, something like this. So when I executed this one, does the services and networks got created in that Docker server where I have executed this command? It has created the services in that server. If you see, now let me connect to my Docker server. If you see this one, in this server we deployed, let me connect to that server. If you see, we have this file. What is the default name? As I told guys, what is the default name of compose file? Sometimes in the interview also they'll ask, what is the default name? It should be docker -compose.yml, or it can be YAML, or it can be YAML. So yesterday we have executed something like this, docker compose up -d. Yesterday it's already running. What it is trying to say now? These are already running. These are already running. What it is trying to say now? Is it recreating? Is it deploying again? It is saying up to date, because there is no change. Now let's say I am trying to deploy this one. I am trying to update this image. Now there is a change in the code. Let's say there is a different tag, this image. Now if I execute docker compose up -d now, is it going to recreate that service, this service? Now there is a change in the image. I want to deploy another image now. Does it going to be recreated now? If you see, as of now, it is running with this image. Now let me execute. Now do you see, is it recreating that service? But why I am getting this error? Why I am getting this error? It is trying to recreate. Why I am getting this error? It is not because of already exist. There is no tag with that name, right? If I go to this repository, if I go to that repository, this one, do I have that tag, version 2 tag? No. So that's why it is giving that error, right? Let's see, maybe I created with a different, maybe same application only, but a different repository. I have some tags, one latest, let's say, let's take this one. I will update that. Same application only, but a different registry. Sorry. Register name is different. Let's take this one. Now this is the name where I have that image. Now, if you see, is it recreating that service with that image? Only that one. But for this one, the other one, it is up to date. It is not recreating Mongo, that other service. Now, if you see, is that application is recreated? Is that service, is that container is recreated with that image now? Different image. Now, this is, we can deploy. Now, if I want to stop, what I can do? Docker compose, stop the containers. I can do this like this: Docker compose stop, Docker compose start, Docker compose down, Docker compose restart. We have compose commands: Docker compose restart, Docker compose ps. We have Docker compose images. We have a Docker compose ps, Docker compose images, Docker compose logs. Now, before I explain what is the difference between this one and this one, what is the difference between this, let's say, we have a Docker images and also we have a Docker compose images. We have a Docker PS, we have a Docker compose PS. How different it these two guys? Any guess, any idea? How different this one is from this one? What Docker images does? What Docker compose images does? Any guess? Any idea? So the scope of all these comments, that the scope of all these Docker compose related comments, is it related, is the scope of these comments is entire the Docker server? The comments, the scope is limited to the services which are defined in that compose file. All these compose related comments, the scope of these comments, is it related to the complete Docker server, or these comments will work against the services which are defined in these compose files? If I execute Docker images, is it going to display images, all the images which is part of that server? If I execute Docker images, is it going to show the images which is part of that server, all the images? Yes. But if I execute Docker compose images, is it going to display all the images which is part of that server, or only the images which we are using in that compose? Which is defined in that compose, right? So similarly like this, Docker PS, if I execute Docker PS, is it going to display all the containers which is running in that system, or whatever services, whatever containers are created out of that compose? Whatever is created out of that compose, right? Now, if you see Docker images, I have some images like this. Now, if I execute Docker compose images, do you see it is showing something like this? Only the images which is using for that in that server using that compose like this. You can execute Docker compose ps, Docker compose stop. So if I execute Docker compose stop, what it is going to do? Is it going to stop the containers, the services which is created using that compose file? It is going to stop. But in the background, this command is looking for which file in the current directory where I am executing. In the background, all these compose commands are looking for which file in the background? It is looking for that compose file. Suppose this is the default name. This is the default name. Suppose I don't have with this default name. I have with a different name. I have with different name. Now, when I execute these commands, is it working? Docker compose ps, Docker compose images, Docker compose up, whatever, down, logs. Is it working? If I have with a custom name? No. So if I have a custom name, what commands, what option I can use? Hyphen F, hyphen F, that file name. So this is the file name, right? Docker compose logs hyphen F. I can use this. 1 second. It has to be reverse. Hyphen F, then that command. So it will be something like this. Now we can execute something like this if it is a different name. Now what is the difference between this stop and down, right? So stop will just stop the containers. Is it going to remove the containers? This Docker compose stop? No, it is going to just stop. When I execute a Docker compose down, what it is going to do? It is going to stop the containers, and also it is going to delete the containers, right? So this is also kind of a source code, this compose file. In real time, where do we maintain this compose file? Are we going to maintain this also as a source code in the source code repository like GitHub? This is also kind of a source code. in real time, are we going to have this compose file also as part of your source code? The way you have a Docker file, you will have a compose files also. So you can have those compose files also part of your source code, right? Now, when you are applying, do you need to have this compose file in the server where you are trying to deploy? Do you need to apply this compose file? Do you need to have this compose file in the server where you want to apply? You need to have that compose file in the server where you are trying to apply, right? So the way you have a Docker file, similarly, you are going to have a compose file also. You are going to have a compose file also, something like this. Something like this. Now, if I want to deploy that using compose, can I do this in a Jenkins pipeline? I can clone the code, I can build application package, I can build the image, I can push the image. Then can I copy that compose file, which is part of my source code, to the server where I want to deploy something like this? Using some plugins like SSH agent, can I copy that compose file to the server where I want to deploy? Then can I execute those commands like Docker compose up, whatever commands I want to execute? Can I execute that server in the deployment server? Automation. Will I able to do this way? So we can do this way. So we are going to have a compose file also part of the source code. Now, the scope of the commands, as I told, is it related to the entire system? The commands, whatever I am executing, compose commands, or is it limited to that file? It's limited to only that file, that compose file. Okay. Now, let's try to see a few more options which we are going to do with compose, right? Just 1 minute, I'll be back. So now let's try to continue a few more topics on this. Now, if you observe, when I created a networks, when I created a services, when I created a volumes using compose, if you see why there is a prefix like this, the container name also, it is like having something like this, service name underscore one, service name underscore one. Volume name is also have that prefix. That network, whatever network also got created, has that prefix. What is this? Do you think is it a username or it's a working directory? What do you think? Is it going to be a username or is it kind of a working directory or project directory where you have that compose? It's not an username. It's not an username. Basically, it's a working directory, that project directory. Suppose if I execute this compose commands from that directory, like I have the directory called Spring App. So what do you see this prefix? Do you see that project name, that folder name, right? So that is not an username, that is a working directory, that folder name where you have a compose file, kind of a application name. It's not an username. Okay. Now let's say another, I don't want compose to create a values. I don't want compose to create a networks. I want these values and networks should be created outside of compose. I just want to create a containers. Is it possible? We have a one more option here. I don't want these values to be created by compose. I don't want these networks to be created by compose. Outside of the compose, there is one option here, external true. External true, which means if I don't have these values and networks already available, since I'm defining external true, is it going to create a value? Does compose is going to create a value and network? If this is the option, if we don't have these values already available, this network is not already available, does compose will create value and network now? If with this option, are these values and networks to be created outside of the compose? I mean to say, prior deploying these services. Now let's say I'm giving something like this, Spring App Bridge. I want this container to be created here. Now let's say value name, I'm saying mango val you, something like this. So since I'm using external true, if I don't have a value with this name, if I don't have a network with this name, does compose is going to create, guys? Now let's say, now let me delete down. I'm deleting. Now let's say I'm defining values networks as external. Now I don't have a value with this name, whatever name I have defined. I don't have a network with that name, whatever I have defined in my compose file. So since I am defining as external true, is it going to create a value, a network now? Or it will throw error saying that value doesn't exist, network doesn't exist? Just guess your answer, whether it will create or it will throw error. So since I'm saying external, it will throw error. Since I'm saying external, it is not going to create a value if this doesn't exist. But if I don't mention as external, if this value doesn't exist, is it going to create? If I don't mention this external, it is going to create if I don't mention this. Okay. Let me show that. Now let's say I'm trying to deploy. Now, do you see it is saying error? Network with this name declared as external could not be found. Please create manually. So in this case, it is going to, we need to create manually something like this for network. I'll get a value also, same error. I need to create a value like this or whatever driver. Now, since I defined as external, it is not going to create on its own. Now, it is just creating a services. It is just creating a containers in that value, using that networks and values. Now, if I make it down also, is it going to remove the network? Since I have declared as external, it is not managed by compose now. If I execute docker compose down, is it going to delete the network which is managed outside of compose? No. it is just going to delete the services. It is not removing the network because it's defined as external. Like this, we can use compose. Now let's say I have a mutual dependency. I have a mutual dependency, which means when I am deploying this compose, before this application, before this container is created, I want this container to be created first. Mutual dependency, startup order. Then how can I do that? I want this service to be created first before creating this service. If there is a mutual dependency, startup order. In that case, there is one option called depends on. There is one option called depends on that service name. So even though this service is defined first, since there is a depends on this service, so which service will be deployed first? Before creating a container for this one, since because of this line, is it going to create this service first? So we can use this depends on to start the other service before starting this service. This is how we can use. Now there are a lot of other things also. There is a one more option called deploy. Here I can mention replicas, how many replicas I want to create, something like this. You know, so which means how many containers will be created for this service? If I mention something like this, deploy replicas as to deploy how many replicas has to be created, something like this. I can mention 2 containers. But since it's a normal Docker, standalone Docker, can I have a 2 containers? Can I create a services with 2 containers in a normal Docker? Like scaling, load balancing. Does this happen in a normal service? I mean to say normal only container, standalone containers. You are not using any container orchestration like Docker Swarm. Does this instruction will be considered? If I have this instruction, is it going to be considered? No. This will be considered only in Docker Swarm. Now it's a normal Docker. There is no Swarm initialized as of now. Now even though if I mention like that, right? Let's say I have defined this deploy replicas as 2. Even though I defined, if I try to execute, if I try to apply, now there is a typo. 1 second. Guys, how to validate compose file? How to validate compose file? Yesterday we discussed. I want to validate. What command we can use? Now I want to validate. Let's say, can I use this command? Config. So do you see? It is saying this is invalid because you are using unsupported attribute. Where I am using unsupported attribute? It is saying where I am using unsupported attribute. I am using under services under this service. Now it is not, there is a typo. Now let's say now here I am not following indentation. I am not following indentation. This time, is it going to throw some parsing error? Do you see? It is saying, so there is a issue at line number 5, parsing error, indentation problem. So here it is not properly placed, right? So indentation. Instead of image, can I use images? Something like this. Will I get an unsupported attribute error? Now, if I use instead of image, if I say images, am I going to get unsupported attribute error? Yes. But these service names, can I give anything? This service name, can I give ABC? Yes. So values is based on your requirement. These values is based on your image, your port mapping, that based on that. Now I can validate something like this. If everything is correct, am I getting this output? Config. And also if you observe, is it giving some warning? Some services use deploy key, which will be ignored. So in a normal Docker, is it going to consider that attribute? Is it going to create a 2 containers for that image, that service? No. No, I can execute something like this. Now, if you see, even though this Mongo service is created second in the compose file, why it is creating first? Why this service is getting created first? If you see, I have a Mongo defined in the second here. Why Mongo service is getting created first? Because did I define this? Depends on. So because of that, it is creating first. So we can use this compose file. But nowadays, as I already told, lot of people are using Kubernetes. They're not using Docker or they're not using Docker Swarm. But sometimes in the interview, they may ask you to write a Docker compose file. Guys, in the interviews, you no need to exactly write the compose file, just a syntaxes. In the Docker file also, they may ask you to write a sample Docker file. You no need to remember. If it is very big URL, you no need to remember that URL, something like this. You no need to remember all these things, this URL, whatever you use to download. Just you can say syntax, what from, what it does, run. You just mention here, I am going to use that URL which is required to download that file. They'll not focus on these things. They'll just focus on these things. Whether you are using right instructions, whether you are using right attributes, right? So that is more important. Now, using Docker Compose, we can apply multi-container applications. Now, I would like to give one assignment on this one. The way you deployed the container using command, I would like you to deploy the containers using compose file using Jenkins. Will you guys able to do it? Using Jenkins, I want you to create a containers using compose file in your deployment server. Already I have shown the pipeline, some sample pipeline. You can enhance that pipeline. This one, right? Will you guys do that? I want you to deploy using Jenkins, using compose file. Now, one more enhancement I would like to give. So whenever you are building image, let me give the pipeline itself. Okay. Whenever you are building image, I want you to tag image with build number. How can you do that? Can I take that build number as one variable? This environment variable, Jenkins variable. Now I want you to tag. Can I tag like this? When I am building the image with that build number, can I tag like this? While pushing also, can I refer that? While pushing also like this. Now I want you to have a compose file in your source code. I want you to have a compose file in your source code. That can be for any application. It no need to be for this application. It no need to be for this application. That can be for any application. Maybe that you can do for this application also. I want you to have a compose file here like this. Now in your compose file, if you hard code something like this, I want you to have that compose file in your source code. If you don't give anything, when you are applying this compose file, what image will be applied? What image it will try to use? Colon latest. But if you are building image, with some build number, do you have that image in the registry? That colon latest? No. Now, if I hard code also, n number of times I change the code, n number of times this pipeline is executed, is it going to deploy different images if I hard code, or will it be a same image will be applied every time, even though there is a change in the code? If you hard code in your compose, if I hard code like this, for the first time, maybe build number is 1, this will be deployed. But second time build number is 2. When you are applying this again using your pipeline, will the version 2 tag will be deployed if you hard code in your compose file? No. Same image. Now, I want you to somehow change this compose file in your pipeline. Will you able to change this tag? Will you able to replace this one with build number dynamically? I don't want you to hard code here. I don't want you to hard code here. This build number has to be replaced in your pipeline before you copy and deploy. Before this stage, I want you to have a stage where this file has to be updated. Since this file is part of source code itself, do you have that file as part of your Jenkins workspace? Will you able to update this file in your Jenkins workspace and then copy that file to the server where you want to deploy? Since it is part of source code, you are cloning that code. Will that compose file will be part of your Jenkins? Will you able to edit that file in the Jenkins, then copy and apply? Because it is part of source code, you can update and apply. How can you apply? Your knowledge. How can you update this compose file on the fly in the pipeline? Your knowledge, whatever you have learned so far. Arguments can I pass for compose or arguments for build? I can pass arguments for build, not for compose. Can I have some placeholder, something like this in my source code? Can I have a placeholder, something like this? So here, can I, using SCD, can I find and replace? Can I update that using SCD? I will have a stage update image tag in compose. Here, can I use SCD command to SCD to update this one, replace this one with this build number using SCD? Will you be able to do that? So here in my compose file in the source code, I have something like this. So using SCD, can I find and replace something? SCD Linux. So this is the assignment for you, right? Implement CI/CD for this project only. Implement CI/CD for this project only, which you guys already done. But this time I want you to use this compose file. Already compose file is part of this one. Clone this, clone, fork this repo to your GitHub and update whatever you want to update here, your registry, right? Update this one with your registry, fork this repo to your GitHub. Then I want you to build and apply. Have a stage like this, have a stage like this, where you find and replace that whatever placeholder you have in the compose file with your actual tag which you want to apply. So if I have this kind of a pipeline, whenever there is a change in the code, is it going to create an application package, Docker image, and it is going to push the Docker image, and using compose, will that image will be deployed in that server wherever I want to deploy if I have this kind of a pipeline. So we will have a pipeline which will automate our build and deployment process. Now, I would like everyone to do this assignment so that you can understand how we are going to use all these tools in the real time. Is the assignment is clear for everyone, guys? What needs to be done? Is everyone clear with assignment? What needs to be done? Assignments are very, very important. We are giving assignments not as a punishment for you. We are giving assignments to test your knowledge, to build a confidence in you, right? If you do the assignments, you can understand, yes, I have done something on my own. So this is what we are going to do in the real time, not more, right? You will have some additional stages in your pipelines. I am demonstrating with some sample application, but once you go into a project, you will have a real application. But does the concept will vary, whatever I am explaining? Whether it's a real-time application, whether it's a sample application, the concepts remain same. So if you just by heart these commands, like sh, do this, if you just by heart these commands and execute, will you be able to apply whatever knowledge you have learned once you get into a project? By heart won't help. Don't by heart anything. Understand the concept and apply those concepts so that you will gain the confidence. So assignments are giving for you to build a confidence within you, and also it will help you to crack the interview yourself, and you can manage your work also. You no need to look for someone help. If once you get into a company, you can do the tasks on your own if you do the assignments. So that's why assignments are more important. Okay, try to do these assignments, then you can understand how it works. Now let's try to continue another topic, Docker Swarm. Docker Swarm. So what is Docker Swarm and what is Docker? What is Docker, guys? So far we discussed almost last 14 days. We were discussing about Docker. So what is Docker and what is Docker Swarm? So what is Docker Swarm? I will explain. What is Docker? So what is Docker and what is Docker Swarm? Okay. So Docker is just a containerization tool. So Docker is just a containerization tool using which what we can do? Using Docker, we can deploy, we can build and we can deploy our applications as a containers. So we can build and deploy our applications as a containers. But if I only use containers in real time, will I able to achieve all the things whatever I want to achieve? Will I able to scale my containers if I use only Docker? Will I able to load balance my containers if I use only Docker? If container goes down, if container goes down, will it containers will be recreated automatically if I use only Docker? If I use only Docker, we can't scale containers. Scaling in the sense, if there is a lot of load on my application, if I have just one container, do I need to increase to two containers, two replicas if there is a lot of load? I need to scale. Instead of one replica, I need to have a two replicas or three replicas. If I have a more replicas, do I need a load balancing within the Docker? If I have instead of one container, if I have a 3-4 containers for the same application, same service, do we need some kind of a load balancing within the Docker? If the request goes to Docker, does Docker has to distribute the traffic to the containers of that service? We need some kind of a load balancing feature. We need some kind of a scaling feature. So Docker is just a normal containerization tool. We cannot scale, we cannot load balance if multiple replicas. And if something goes wrong with container, suppose, let's say I am able to access this application. Since this is up and running, I can access this application. But if something goes wrong with that container, that process, is it recreating a container now? Let me show you. I am able to access that application. Now, I am able to access that application. Let's say something went wrong with this container. The container process is stopped, or I'm intentionally stopping, or I'm intentionally removing. Now, this container will be recreated. Now, if you see, now is my application is up? Is my application is up? No. And also, in real time, I will have hundreds of containers. Will I able to manage containers in a single server, or I need to have a multiple servers? In real time, you will have hundreds of containers, hundreds of applications. We need to have a multiple servers. Is it easy for you to manage lot of containers and lot of servers on your own? No. So that is where container orchestration softwares comes into picture. That is where container orchestration softwares comes into picture. So Docker is just a containerization tool. So what are the popular containerization tools we have? We have a Docker, we have a containerd, we have something like this CoreOS, we have Rocket. But out of this, which one is popular? Docker. Like this, we have some containerization softwares. Now, to manage the containers, we have a container orchestration softwares. What are the container orchestration softwares we have? We have a Docker Swarm, we have a Kubernetes, we have an OpenShift, like this, right? So nowadays, which one is most widely used and most popular demanded container orchestration software? Kubernetes. But still some projects will be using Docker Swarm, right? So we'll try to discuss what is Docker Swarm, how it works, right? So Docker Swarm is what? Is it a containerization tool or it's a container orchestration tool? It's an orchestration tool. So what is the meaning of orchestration in general? Forget about container orchestration. What is the meaning of orchestration in general? Orchestration or orchestrating, managing. So container orchestration. So Docker Swarm is a container orchestration. So Docker Swarm is going to manage what? It's a container orchestration software which will manage containers, okay, which is going to manage the containers. It's a container orchestration. If something goes wrong with containers, it is going to manage. If something goes wrong with servers where the containers are running, is it going to recreate the servers? Is it going to manage the servers? I mean to say, if something goes wrong with server itself, the Docker server, is it going to create the server, replace that server with other server? No. It is not a infrastructure orchestration. It is not going to manage the servers. It is just going to manage the containers which are running in that server. Maximum, what it can does, if some Docker server goes down, maximum what it can does, it will move the containers from that server to another Docker server, which is part of the cluster. If some server goes down, the containers will be moved to another server in the same cluster, maximum. But it will not manage, it is not going to create the servers. So it's a container orchestration software to manage the containers. Orchestra. If you are new to orchestration, right? I don't think you are new to orchestra. Have you have you been to orchestra anytime? Orchestra. Have you heard at least the term orchestra? So what is that orchestra? Basically, if you see, orchestra is like nowadays we call it as a musical brand, musical bands or music, troops we call it nowadays, right? So if you observe, there will be a different members in that troop, right? There will be a guys who is singing, there will be a guys who is playing the piano, someone play violin, someone will play some other instrument, right? If you see, there will be a group of people, they are performing something, they are singing. And if you observe, right, there will be one guy in that orchestra, in that group. He is not going to sing, he is not going to play any instrument, but if you see, that guy is completely controlling that group, right? He is going to coordinate with all the members by waving of his hands, right? So that guy we call it as what? That guy we call it as a master, the orchestrator, the master, the head. That guy is responsible for what? That guy is responsible for controlling the complete group, coordinating with all the members of that group, and giving a better performance, better output. So similarly, I have a lot of Docker containers, lot of Docker servers is there. Do I need some coordinator who can control, who can manage those containers and the servers in that group, in that cluster? I have a lot of containers and servers. Do I need someone, some coordinator, some orchestrator, or some master who needs to be coordinated and controlled so that my containers will be highly available? If that container is not doing well, that container will be replaced with another container. So that is what container orchestration does. In simple words, I can say like this. Container orchestration is basically a software which will coordinate, which will manage the containers and its servers. So Docker Swarm is a container orchestration software which is responsible for managing the containers. Now we call it as a Docker Swarm cluster. We call it as a Docker Swarm cluster, or we call it as a Kubernetes cluster. So what is the meaning of cluster? Cluster. Cluster is nothing but, in general, it's a group. Cluster is nothing but a group. So Docker Swarm cluster. So Docker Swarm cluster is nothing but what? Group of Docker servers or hosts. So in this group, there will be two types of participants. In these clusters, there will be two types of participants. What are those? We will have a masters, we will have a workers. We will have a masters, we will have a workers. So master servers are master machines, worker machines. So what is the role of this master or masters? Will they control that complete group, that cluster? Will they coordinate between all those members and control that cluster? So we have a master, we have a workers. So master is responsible for managing that cluster, the Docker servers and the containers which are running in that cluster. Now we have a lot of advantages when we go for a Docker Swarm, I mean to say container orchestration. In real time, 99% of the cases, are we going to just use only containers, only Docker? 99%. Are we going to use only Docker? No. If there are containers, we are going to use one more software called container orchestration. That can be either Kubernetes, that can be either Docker Swarm, that can be either OpenShift, like that. So we have a lot of challenges when we only go for a Docker, right? So in a traditional model, you have a Docker server. You are going to interact with the Docker server using CLI. So do you have any master who can control the containers which is running in this server, in a normal model? Do they have any relationship with each other? If I have a lot of Docker servers, do they have any relationship with each other in a normal? No. Now, if I go for a Docker Swarm container orchestration, so we have a swarm. This swarm is nothing but what? This Docker Swarm is nothing but what? This is a master. This is a master. So this is a master. Can I call this as one cluster? Can I call this as one cluster? Docker Swarm cluster. We have a, this I can call it as a cluster. So I have a master. Can I call these things as a workers? Workers which is part of that cluster, worker nodes. We call it as a worker nodes. Nodes, that can be a worker node, that can be a master node. So this is a master node, these are the worker nodes. Now, if I want to deploy this application in this cluster, Docker Swarm, whom should we contact? Do I need to contact with each and every worker to deploy my application, to deploy my containers? Do I need to contact each and every worker node, each and every node which is part of that cluster? Or I need to contact the master? We will interact with what? We will interact with only master. So I will request master. I will request master, I want to deploy so and so image. I need 2 containers or 3 containers or 4 containers for that image. So who will decide? Who will decide where to deploy that containers? I will just request master who will schedule the containers and who will manage those containers. It, who is going to schedule the containers and who is going to manage those containers? I will request master, but who will decide? Who will decide where the container has to be scheduled, in which node it has to be scheduled in this group? And if something goes wrong with that container or that server, who is going to manage that container again? Who will recreate that container again? That will be done by master. Master, right? So as a developer or as a DevOps guy or Jenkins CI/CD, we will just work with master. I want to deploy so and so image in the cluster. So master will decide in which node it has to create the container. If there are multiple containers, it will distribute those containers to these machines based on the resources available. Then it will manage. So who is managing that master role? In orchestra, there is one master who is controlling like this. Who is managing that orchestrator role here? This swarm. This is the master. Now, as I already told, what is Docker Swarm? Docker Swarm is a cluster management and orchestration feature embedded in a Docker's engine itself. Which means to set up the Docker Swarm, do I need to install any additional softwares? To set up the Docker Swarm, do I need to install any additional softwares? Not required. The Docker Swarm is embedded as part of the Docker itself. So Docker Swarm, cluster of Docker engines, Docker nodes. We call it as a Docker engines, Docker nodes. We will have a managers, we will have a workers. We can have one manager or more managers. In real time, we will have a multiple managers. What is the problem if I have only one manager for that cluster? Suppose I have a only one manager, one master for that cluster. What is the problem? So let's say this is one cluster. I have a workers. If I have only one master, in real time you will have a multi-master. What is the problem with only one master? If this master is having issues, if this master node goes down, do we have anyone to manage this cluster? Do we have any other master to manage this cluster? No. So instead of one master, let's say I have another master like this, multiple masters, multi-master. So if there are multi-master, then if this master goes down, does another master is available to manage this cluster? So in real time, you will have a multi-master for high availability, for high availability. So in that cluster, we will have one or more managers, and rest of the machines are what? Rest of the machines are called as workers. Workers. So when we have a multi-master, right? One will be kind of a leader. When we have a multi-master, one will be kind of a leader. Other will be like a secondary managers, reachable. All those masters will have a communication internally. All the masters will communicate with each other, right? So there will be a one leader. If that leader goes down, secondary manager will become a leader. Just to give an example, suppose your manager is going on leave. Your manager is going on leave. Does your manager will leave you like, I am going on leave, do whatever you want to do, you don't work, enjoy for the whole week, go to movies, go to shopping? Will the manager will live like that? If that manager is not well, he is going on vacation or he is sick, does other manager comes into picture? Does other manager comes into picture? Who is going to track what you are doing, whether you are doing the task whatever is assigned to you, whether you are not doing? So similarly, there will be a multiple masters. We can have a multi master. There will be a leader. There will be a leader. If this leader goes down, the secondary leader becomes the leader. Like a best example, what I can say, in our childhood, like when we were studying, there was a lot of competition for class leaders. At least we can feel someone is, like the class is listening to my words, right? So there is a lot of competition for leaders, CR, class representative. So there will be one leader. If that leader is going for vacation, that guy, that student is not coming, or he is going outside for 1 hour, does that leader will inform secondary leader, I am going out, can you look after this class, make a note of who is making noise, who is not studying? So similarly, you have a multi-master. All these masters will be in sync. All these masters will be in sync. If this master is not doing well, this guy will manage the cluster. To achieve high availability in the control plane, in the masters, do we need to go with multi-master? We need to go with a multi-master. So in real time, you will have a multiple managers. Okay. So what is the advantage? What is the advantages with the Docker Swarm? What is the advantage with the Docker Swarm, right? So will I able to achieve high availability, my applications, scaling, fault tolerance, load balancing, all those stuff at a container level? At a container level, will I able to scale my containers? Will I able to achieve fault tolerance? Fault tolerance in the sense, if one of the container is not doing well, does the containers will be recreated? And if I have a multiple containers, will I able to do the load balancing at a container level within the cluster? The way we have achieved high availability, load balancing, fault tolerance in server infrastructure, will I able to achieve same things at a container level using these container orchestration softwares? We can do that, right? So we have a lot of advantages when we go for a Docker Swarm, like declarative service model. It's a cluster management. What is the meaning of declarative service model? Do I need to write any code to manage high availability, load balancing, anything? Do I need to write any code, or I can just define what I need? I can just define in a declarative way. I can just say I need 2 containers for so and so image. We can just define in a declarative model, either using commands, or either using that YML file. So in the background, who is going to manage all those things? The master. I can scale the containers. I can do the load balancing at a container level. And if I have a multiple servers, will I able to achieve this multi-host networking? The containers in one Docker machine will be able to communicate with container in another Docker machine, which is part of the same cluster, using multi-host networking. What is this multi-host networking? We discussed what driver. We have an overlay, that overlay networks. So desired state reconciliation. What is the meaning of desired state reconciliation? Suppose I am declaring, I am creating a service saying that I need 2 replicas. I am creating a service saying that I need a 2 replicas. It will do the desired state reconciliation. So it will create 2 containers in that cluster. So desired is what? Since I am saying I need 2 containers, desired is what? Desired is 2. If something goes wrong with one of the container, so desired is 2, actual is 1, desired is 2, actual is 1. So again, does it match with the desired state? Again, since actually we have only 1 container for that service, is it going to create another container again? The desired state reconciliation. So this way, if I create a service with 2 replicas, will I have always 2 containers in that cluster for that service? Yes. And also service discovery. What is this service discovery? Basically, service discovery is nothing but what? Within the cluster, there will be DNS. Within the cluster, there will be a DNS. So one application, will it able to communicate with other application using service name, irrespective in which node that application, that container is running in that cluster? We no need to worry about in which worker node it is running. One application, one service in the cluster, will it able to communicate with other application, other service using service name, there is a service discovery, DNS. So we have a lot of features like this. Now, to set up this Docker swarm, I need some servers. If required, can I set up this Docker swarm in a normal data center servers also? Or we can set up Docker swarm only in the cloud? Can I set up Docker swarm wherever I want to set up if I have some servers? I can set up this Docker swarm cluster wherever I want to set up. It no need to be in AWS. It no need to be in Azure. So if I have a normal data center where I have some servers, I can set up. Now, since everyone is using AWS now, right? I am going to create a servers in AWS. To demonstrate this Docker swarm, I am going to take 3 servers for now. Total, I am going to take 3 servers for now. One server I am using for what purpose? One server I am using for a master. These 2 servers I am going to use for a workers perspective, right? So I am going to create total 3 servers, and again I am creating all our Ubuntu servers because Docker officially doesn't support Red Hat. I am going to take 3 Ubuntu servers in AWS to set up the cluster. Then what software is required to set up the Docker swarm in those servers? What software is required? The only required software is Docker. Now we need to open some ports. We need to open some ports in those servers. These ports needs to be opened because master and we have a workers. So master will communicate with workers. Workers also will communicate with each other. So how this communication will happen? It will communicate, the master machine will communicate with worker on some port. The workers also will communicate with each other on some port. So if I don't open the firewall, if I don't open these ports here, does master will be able to communicate with workers? So we need to open some ports, these ports. So 2377. So what is running on 2377? Basically, your Docker process will be running on 2377. Under 7946 TCP as well as UDP protocol, 7946 needs to be opened. And 4789 UDP protocol 4789. For what purpose we need to open this port? If you see here, multi-host networking, that overlay network. So you need to open these ports. Now, let me create the servers. If required, can I use these servers to set up the cluster? This server is already there. Can I use this server? This server, I can use it as a master. This server, I can use it as a worker if required. You can do that. You already have a Docker. Can I use this machine already? We can do that, right? Otherwise, you create a 3 more servers, right? So here, first let me clean up everything. In this server, I am trying to use this server. I don't want to create another server. So let me clean up everything, whatever has been deployed so far in this machine in a normal Docker. I removed the containers. I removed the images, whatever I have. Then let me remove the networks, unused networks, whatever I have. So like this. Now I can use this machine. Already Docker is installed. But in this machine, what ports needs to be opened, as I already told? Do I need to open all these ports to set up the cluster before setting up the cluster? Do I need to open all these ports? Volumes, if you want to delete, you can delete. Otherwise, you can leave it. Volumes, you can leave it, or if you want to delete, you can delete. But if you delete the volume, you will lose the data. Now, we need to open these ports. Make sure you open these ports in your AWS security groups, firewall, in the inbound rules. But these ports are internal. Do I need to open these ports for everywhere, like 0.0.0, or I need to open these ports only for that servers, only for the Docker servers, only for that worker machines, or only for that network? Do I need to open these ports for everywhere? Is it a best practice to open this port for all the IPs? These are internal ports. No. So I will open those ports 2377 TCP as well as UDP, both 7946 or 4789, these things. Otherwise, can I do this way? All traffic, I mean to say all protocol, all traffic. Can I open only for that VPC in which I am going to create these servers? This one. What is this? 172.31.0./16. This is CIDR. CIDR of what? CIDR of my VPC in which I am creating a cluster, in which I am setting up my Docker Swarm cluster. So in this, does my master machine, does my worker machine IPs will be within this range? Does my master machine, my worker machine IPs will be within this range? So will they able to communicate on any protocol on any port if the servers are in this destination, right? Yes. So I'm opening something like this, all traffic only for this range. Now, similarly, let me create a two more machines. Let me create a two more machines. So I am using t2.micro, Ubuntu servers, t2.micro. But in real time, will I able to deploy hundreds of applications, hundreds of containers in t2.micro servers? No. In real time, you will take some high configuration. Right? So for practicing, I am just taking t2.micro. Now I am creating two servers. Now let's say I don't want to waste my time. While creating a server itself, I want to install Docker. What concept I can use here in AWS so that while creating a server itself, I want to install Docker? What concept we can use here in AWS? Sorry. VPC is network. Already we have a VPC. I am creating these servers in that VPC, default VPC, where we have a subnets, all are public subnets. So what concept I can use here to execute some commands while starting this tags? Can I execute some commands, some script using tags? In AWS we discussed using tags are just giving a metadata name, tags, key value pairs. I am asking, I want to install some softwares. I want to execute some commands while starting the machine, while creating the machine. User data, user data. Sometimes in the interview, they will not ask directly this question, what is user data in AWS? They may ask this way, I want to perform something. I want to execute some commands while creating the server in AWS. What do you use? That is basically user data. So in user data, can I have some commands which will install Docker? Something like this, user data. Something like this. Shebang line, shebang line, shebang line, whatever. Using this one you can do, or can I use sudo apt install docker.io, or using this script which we already discussed. So I am giving that as a user data. Then the tags are basically names. You can give whatever key value pairs, Docker, server, something like this. Anything, any key value pairs you can give like this. So I'm creating total 2 servers, and here also do I need to make sure I have opened that port, whatever ports I have told, all traffic I'm saying, but not for everywhere, only for this VPC. In this VPC only I am creating the servers. Now I have total 3 servers. As of now, do they have any relationship with each other? As of now, do they have any relationship with each other? So total I have 3 servers. I'm getting total 3 servers. They don't have any relationship with each other. But in all the servers, do we have a Docker software? In all the servers, we have a Docker software, but they don't have relationship with each other. Now, let me give some names. Let me give some tags like names. I'm saying Docker Swarm master. But will it become a master if I just give this AWS tag as master? Does it become a master? If I just give Docker Swarm worker, I'm saying worker one. I'm just giving a tag. These are AWS tags, nothing to do with what is inside. Now these are just normal standalone Docker machines. Now I have to initialize the cluster. I want to initialize the cluster. I want to initialize the swarm. In any one of the machine, out of these three machines, in any one of the machine, I can execute this command. I can execute this command, Docker swarm init. So the moment I execute this Docker swarm init, what will happen? The machine in which I am executing that command, will it become a master? The machine in which I am executing that command, will that machine becomes a master? The swarm? Yes. Then this gives, this will initialize the master. So let me do that first. Later I will explain. So let me connect to this server. which I want to make it as a master, or any machine. So I am already, I think, in this same machine. So here, what software we required? We need a Docker software. Do we have a Docker software already available in this machine? So we have a Docker. Now, let me connect to these two machines also. Let me connect to these two machines also. Let me SSH to these two machines also. Now, this one, if you see, do I have a Docker installed in this machine already using user data? We have a Docker installed. Similarly, let me connect to this machine also, all these machines. But as of now, does these machines have a relationship with each other? Any relationship with each other, or these are normal standalone Docker servers? These are normal Docker servers, right? So we have a Docker. Now, in any one of the machine, I can execute this command docker swarm init. What it does? What it does? It initialize the master. Now, while initializing master, I can initialize Docker Swarm on a public IP or a private IP of this server. I can advertise Docker Swarm, or I can initialize Docker Swarm on a public IP or private IP. So, do I really need to initialize Docker Swarm on a public IP? Because these workers also part of same VPC, same network. Will they able to communicate with private IP even though Docker Swarm is initialized using private IP? Does workers and masters will be able to communicate with each other using private IPs itself, since they are in a same VPC, same network? Do I need to initialize Docker Swarm on a public IP? Not required, right? So I no need to initialize something like this. I can advertise, I can execute this Docker Swarm init like this. Docker Swarm init on this public IP. But that is not required, right? Because all are running in the same VPC. So I can execute something like this Docker Swarm init. So by default, the Docker Swarm will be initialized using which IP? That master will be using which IP of this machine, right? So it is initialized on a private IP. Now the swarm is initialized. The swarm is initialized. This commands works now. So how many nodes are part of this cluster now? How many nodes are part of this cluster now? These are Docker Swarm commands. How many nodes are part of this cluster as of now? Only one. How many nodes I can see here? Only one. What is this node? This node only. So if you see, is it a manager? Is it a leader? The current node. We have only one node, that is master. Now, how I can join these two machines as a workers to that node, to that cluster? I want to join these two machines as a workers to this cluster. If you see, to add a worker to this swarm, to add a workers to this swarm, run the following command. So this swarm will give tokens. There will be two types of tokens. The swarm will give two types of tokens. One is master tokens and another one is worker token. So if I get the worker token and execute this worker token in other server, as a which node it will join the cluster? Suppose this is a worker token. If I take this token and execute in this machine, if I execute that in this machine, this will be joined to that cluster as a what? Will it be joined to that cluster as a master or worker? If I'm executing a worker token as a worker. Suppose if I want to join this node as a master, if I want to join this node as a master, do I need to execute Docker swarm init again in this? If I execute Docker swarm init, will it be joined as a master? No. If I execute Docker swarm init, that will initialize the separate cluster, separate swarm. Now I don't want to initialize another cluster. I want to just add as a manager. In that case, what needs to be done? Do I need to get the master token and execute? Yes, right? Now I'm just demonstrating with single, so I'm just getting a worker token from this one. So it will give two types of token: Docker swarm join token master, basically manager. Docker swarm join token manager. So this is what token? Is it a worker token or manager token? This one, it's a manager token. Suppose if I want to get the worker token, this one, this one. Now if you see this token, what is this IP? What is this port? You see there is one IP in this token. What is this IP? What is this port? Your leader, your Docker Swarm master, the leader machine IP and the port. If I don't open these ports, it will not able to join. Now where I need to execute this token? Where I need to execute this token now? If I want to join some machines as a cluster, can I take this token and execute in this machine? Now if you see, this node joined swarm as a worker. But in the worker machines, does this commands work? Can I execute this Docker node ls, Docker service ls, Docker? These are cluster related commands. Will I able to execute these Docker swarm cluster related commands in the workers? Will I able to modify the state of the cluster from the worker? No. So this is joined as a worker. Now this is my master. Now how many nodes I can see now? How many nodes I can see now in this cluster? How many nodes are part of this cluster? 2. So this one, the current one, this is what? This is what the current one is what? Master. Where you see empty, this is what? This another node, that is worker. Similarly, can I execute the token, worker token in one more machine? This one also? Not this one. This token. Now if I execute this one, now this cluster has how many nodes total? This cluster has how many nodes total? 3. Out of 3, how many masters, how many workers? One master, 2 workers. Okay. So we just set up the cluster. How to deploy the applications in this cluster, we will continue tomorrow, guys. Okay. We just set up the cluster. How to deploy the applications in this cluster, how to scale, how to deploy, we will continue tomorrow. Okay. So tomorrow Docker Swarm will be done. Docker Swarm is very simple compared to Kubernetes. Tomorrow we will done with the Docker Swarm. Day after tomorrow I'll start with Kubernetes. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow, guys. Try to set up the cluster. I'll continue tomorrow. Thank you, guys. I'm stopping the session for today. We'll see you tomorrow.